The ceasefire was announced an hour before Trump's deadline to destroy every power plant and bridge in Iran. Within minutes, headlines declared the war was winding down. Oil dipped, markets breathed, and most people moved on to the next story. But buried inside the details of how this ceasefire actually came together is something that will matter long after the bombs stop falling. China helped broker it. Trump credited China publicly. Iran's ambassador in Beijing called China a true friend and asked it to guarantee that the U.S. won't restart the war. And the yuan payment system that took shape inside the Strait of Hormuz during 5 weeks of fighting is still there. The ceasefire is the headline. What China gained from it is the story. Before the ceasefire, the picture in the Strait of Hormuz was already clear. Chinese tankers were moving freely while Western shipping was locked out. Payments were settled in yuan through China's CIPS payment system. A Chinese maritime services company brokered the transit fees. That was the situation during the war. The ceasefire was supposed to change that. Iran agreed to reopen the strait. But here's what the ceasefire terms actually say. Iran will guarantee safe passage for 2 weeks while negotiations continue. The negotiations will take place in Islamabad, and Iran has proposed its own 10-point plan, which includes lifting all sanctions, U.S. withdrawal from all regional bases, and compensation for war damages. Nothing in those terms dismantles the toll system. Nothing removes the IRGC's shipping channel near Larak Island. Nothing reverses the yuan payment infrastructure. The strait is reopening, but on terms that were built during the war, not before it. Trump himself credited China with helping bring Iran to the table. In an interview with AFP after the announcement, he said he believed China played a key role. China's foreign ministry confirmed it had made its own efforts and revealed that Foreign Minister Wang Yi made 26 phone calls with parties including Iran, Israel, Russia, and the Gulf states during the conflict. But the most revealing moment came from Iran's ambassador in Beijing, who held a press conference hours after the ceasefire. He thanked China and Russia for being true friends. Then he said something specific. Iran hopes that big countries like China and Russia, as well as mediating countries like Pakistan and Turkey, will work together to guarantee peace in the region. That word guarantee is doing enormous work. Iran is not asking China to broker a deal. It's asking China to enforce one, to stand behind the agreement and ensure the U.S. doesn't restart the war. That's not mediation. That's a security guarantee. And if China accepts that role, it becomes the first time in decades that a country other than the United States has served as a security guarantor in the Persian Gulf. This is what I think most coverage is missing. The ceasefire looks like an American win on the surface. Trump set a deadline. A deal was reached. The strait is reopening. But look at what happened underneath. Pakistan, not the U.S., mediated the deal. Pakistan's army chief brokered the overnight talks between the U.S. vice president and Iran's foreign minister. The framework is called the Islamabad Accord. The negotiations will be held in Pakistan. And the guarantor Iran wants is China, not America. 5 weeks ago, the U.S. was the sole power broker in the Gulf. The dollar was the only currency that moved oil through Hormuz. American bases provided security guarantees. American mediators ran the negotiations. Oman and Qatar handled the back-channel diplomacy. The entire system ran through Washington. 5 weeks later, the mediator is Pakistan. The guarantor is China. The currency moving through the strait is the yuan. The payment system bypasses Western banks entirely, and the deal will be signed in Islamabad. Every structural pillar of American dominance in the Gulf has been replaced or weakened, not by military force, but by the vacuum the war itself created. The U.S. won the military campaign. The question is whether it lost something larger in the process. The economic dimension is equally significant. Iran's embassy in Zimbabwe posted on social media that it was time to add the petroleum to the global oil market. China's Ministry of Commerce acknowledged the use of yuan to settle payments in the Strait of Hormuz. A Harvard economics professor and former chief economist at the IMF described what's happening in blunt terms. Iran is dead serious about preferring yuan to avoid U.S. sanctions and to cultivate China, which has been moving steadily to redenominate its own trade and that of the BRICS nations into yuan. Analysts are quick to point out that this doesn't end dollar dominance overnight. The yuan isn't freely convertible. China's capital controls limit its adoption. Roughly 80% of global oil transactions still settle in dollars, but the point isn't whether the yuan replaces the dollar. The point is that a precedent has been set. For 5 weeks, oil moved through the world's most important energy choke point in a currency that isn't the dollar, through a payment system that doesn't touch Western banks, brokered by companies that don't answer to Washington. That infrastructure doesn't disappear because a ceasefire was signed. China also provided material support to Iran during the war, though Beijing has been careful to keep it quiet. According to reports, China supplied spare parts for Iranian missiles and provided limited technological assistance, including radar systems and navigation tools. China abstained from a UN Security Council resolution condemning Iranian attacks on Gulf states. And CIPS, China's cross-border payment system, recorded its highest-ever daily transaction volumes during March, surging to over $130 billion per day from a normal range of 85 to 105 billion. China positioned itself perfectly. It didn't fire a shot. It didn't deploy a soldier. It didn't publicly take sides in a way that would provoke Washington. But it kept Iran's oil revenue flowing through yuan-denominated channels, helped build an energy corridor through the most important strait on Earth that bypasses the dollar entirely, and emerged from the ceasefire as the country both sides credit with making the deal possible. That's not luck. That's strategy executed over years and activated at exactly the right moment. The ceasefire is 2 weeks long. The negotiations in Islamabad may or may not produce a permanent deal. Iran's 10-point proposal and America's demands are still far apart. Israel says the ceasefire doesn't apply to Lebanon and has already launched a new offensive against Hezbollah. Iran has threatened to pause Hormuz traffic again if Israeli attacks in Lebanon don't stop. But regardless of whether the ceasefire holds, the architecture that was built during the war remains. The CIPS payment channels between Iran and China are operational. The IRGC's toll booth system has been tested and refined. Pakistan and China have established themselves as the diplomatic axis for the region. And Iran has publicly stated that the strait will only function under a new legal regime with transit fees. 5 weeks of war, and the country that came out of it with the most is the one that never joined the fighting. China didn't win the war, it won the peace. And the terms of that peace are being written in yuan.